Just formally, I am Ray Konopka, founded Ray Software back in 1995, a week before Delphi 1 was released. Anybody use Delphi 1? Some old timers, a couple of us out there. Yeah, imagine that. You know, over 17 years we've been doing this stuff, and we've got a new framework, something new and exciting. A lot of very reminiscent of the Delphi 1 days where we had the VCL was this brand new thing, and you know, we were trying to learn as much as we could from it. We're looking at the source code a lot more than we, you know, have kind of gotten used to, and we're kind of back to that that introductory phase of how does this new technology work. So what I want to spend a good amount of time, I could have also called this, instead of just creating custom FireMonkey controls, I could have called it FireMonkey under the hood. Even if you're not going to be writing custom controls, almost the first hour is a lot of just how does FireMonkey do what it does? Because just like when we learned the VCL, we needed to have a basic understanding of how do we use it before we actually learn how to extend it. How do we create new components and so forth? It's very similar when we talk about FireMonkey. We have the same basic core classes. On the surface, it looks very similar and very familiar to us, but we also want to have an understanding of what's different between the two frameworks. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about what when are we going to create a custom control. The reasons for doing so are much different than they are in the VCL. Some similarities, but it's quite a bit different. The way we customize our user and our controls differs in what we can do and how we do it. And so we're going to spend some time looking at examples of going through that. We'll be talking a lot about styles, why they're important, what role they play in FireMonkey, and so forth. So we're going to have a good basics around of all of that. We'll then take a stroll through the VCL and FMX, or FireMonkey's framework, to understand what are the main players involved on both sides. How many of you guys have built a custom VCL control? Awesome. If you guys have, great. You're ahead of the game, because a lot of what I will draw is, I'll draw the experience from that into what it talks about in FireMonkey. If you haven't, don't worry about it. There's still plenty of information here that it'll help you actually learn how to build better FireMonkey apps because you have an understanding of how they work. And then we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the build process. There's examples in the documentation. There's people writing about them a little bit, you know, on Stack Overflow and other references. You'll see it's like, oh, here's a little control. What we really want to get out of the middle part of this is what is a surefire way to reproduce a correct installation. And if you've done anything with the VCL, you know there's the way that the IDE wants you to work, and then there's the way that kind of really wants to work. And I want to talk to you about, from experience, how do we make things easily redistributable, and how do we package them up right, how do we associate icons with them, all of those professional pieces that you would want to have in your components. So why do we want to create a FireMonkey control? Well, one of the most common reasons is to change the appearance. That's why we ended up creating custom controls for the VCL. We had some levels of customizations. If you thought about a button, for example, I don't know if any of you guys ever, for your really old timers, OWL, the object window library, okay? If you guys remember that, and then throwing you way back, to change the caption of a button, you created a descendant to do just that. And that, people don't realize, now we like, oh, you just change the caption property. In 1994, that was awesome, to be able to simply say button1.caption equals something, rather than do all of this, you know, inheritance to make the customization and so forth. Well, even with Delphi and its revolutionary pieces, you were at the mercy of how the designer developed that control. And most of it, that meant the people writing them for Borland at the time. And so if you wanted to have a colored button, you didn't want the standard, Control 3D look, you wanted a different color on it, you had to resort to some other way. So very early on, we wanted to be able to customize the way a control looked. The same reason does apply in FireMonkey, just not to the extent. FireMonkey's framework provides a whole lot more ways of customizing things from a UI point of view than the VCL ever could. And that's one of the really interesting aspects of that framework. And we'll look at examples of that shortly. Another example or reason for creating a custom control would be to change default properties. Still one of the favorite enhancements to the TRZ panel from my company is we get rid of the caption. The property's still there, but whenever you drop it on a form, the caption's gone. We changed the default property. Sounds simple, but how many times you drop a T panel down, the first thing you do is delete the caption? Every time. Okay? So changing default property values has some value, pardon the pun. So that's another possible reason. Obviously, the critical one is if you want to implement behavior that just doesn't exist in the control, we want to be able to provide some way to do that. And so that's where we will start to create our new custom descendants. And I have examples of exactly this third one, which really lends to the power of what FMX gives us. So styles, unavoidable. Now I have a session, 3 sessions tomorrow. One of them is on skinning your VCL applications using a technology called VCL styles. They sound very similar from FireMonkey styles and VCL styles, and then Embarcadero even blurred the lines more by creating the bitmap style designer, which can edit both of them. They're not the same. They're different things. They do different things. They just have the same name. The point of it is strictly that they provide a way of defining what a control looks like. But in FireMonkey, it goes beyond just what it looks like. It can actually describe how it's made, how is it set up, and what are its pieces. And so when we talk about styles in FireMonkey, every control that you get on the palette that you drop down onto a form, and most of the time when I say a form, I'm referencing a FireMonkey HD form, a 2-dimensional form. The same is true for a 3D form, but some controls have to go into a special layer in order to be put into the 3D space, blah, blah, blah. We won't worry too much about that, but now I'm talking FireMonkey stuff. So every control that you can drop down, there's a pre-built or hard-coded style that has been designed by the component developers. And so, and we'll see a way that we can look at what those default styles look like and how they're made. Because once we do that, it's actually very interesting to see how are things put together, which is a little easier than actually going into the source code and trying to figure it out. Okay, has anybody ever done any .NET WPF development? Okay. You may have, I'm sure you've heard of WPF, Windows Presentation Foundation. There are a lot of analogies between that space compared to WinForms and FireMonkey compared to the VCL. And a lot of the same concepts, a lot of the same motivations for going to there are in place on both sides. Providing very rich user interfaces with FireMonkey and WPF, or Silverlight, same thing. The XAML concept carries over. The point I'm making here is that when we talk of VCL control and how something looks, we really talk about the canvas. We're talking about how something gets painted onto a screen, and it's really just a flat structure that we just paint. Well, in a FireMonkey control, a style is designed as a tree, and it's really just a component tree. It happens to be in the same format as the DFM files, or the streaming format, FMX files for FireMonkey. And so by using the same structure, we now have a hierarchy of elements that work in concert to produce what the UI is going to look like. And if you're ever reading things on WPF, this is similar to the visual tree. There's a logical tree in WPF. We don't really have that, but that's fine. These styles, this hierarchy of controls and primitives, as we'll see, are embedded into resources that get linked into your execution code. So we're going to add them to our component units. They get put into a package. The package can be deployed and so forth. But they're just resources. It's not any different than adding a wave file to a component or a sound effect and so forth. What's really cool about all this, though, is that we're not limited to just what style settings the developers created when they designed the control. We can actually go in and replace and modify the style that is used by a control. And we can do this on a global level or a very localized level. And we have a lot of control over how that gets done. So let's take a look at an example. How many of you guys have actually done any work with FireMonkey? Because playing around with it a little bit? Anybody shipping an app with it? Okay. Not a problem. Okay. I'm doing all of these in XE3. Everything I'm showing now applies to XE2 as well. There are differences, though, when we talk FireMonkey in XE3. I'll get to those. But Delphi or C++ XE3 includes FireMonkey 2, and there have been a lot of changes from FireMonkey 1. So property changes, methods gone, it's restructured. You're probably not going to want to try to target both. Upgrade to XE3 and just target that, because that's where the direction everything is, and don't worry too much about XE2. So I'm going to create a new 2D form. Give myself some space here. And one of the things that I'll scroll up to the top, and we'll find the group box. That's my hint. I think that's it. Yep. So a group box, very simple controls. Got a caption, a little bounding rectangle. We can put stuff onto it. Great. Everything's nice. There are a number of products out there that have specialized group boxes. My Raise software is one of them. One of the controls is called an RZ group box. Why do we provide a custom control for that? To change the UI. People wanted different ways to look at the control. So for example, one of the popular styles we have is, rather than a box around the whole control, there's an underline underneath the caption. So it's a different, simple little look. And so the regular group box, you can't change that. It's built into what picks up from the theme. That's all that you have control over. So with the styles, though, we can change this. And there's style values. There's also properties on the control itself that give us some certain levels of functionality. So if I look at, hang on, let's see here, I moved everything around. If I look at the control itself, there are certain things like I can rotate and change and position and all that. That's what I'd look for. But I'm not actually seeing anything that's controlling how this looks. So, and unfortunately, I wish there was some good guidelines as to know when to look at the object and see what properties are there and when to go to the style. It's kind of hit or miss. But look to see if the properties that you're looking for are surfaced at the component level. And if they are, you can use them directly. If not, we're going to jump to the style. So to do that, I'm just making sure that they didn't move what I'm looking for. So if I right-click on my group box, I have two menu items at the bottom. And one's called custom style and default style. And remember on one of the slides I said that every control has a default style that's hard-coded in, and that's what you get. I get asked this all the time. People see this, it's like, oh, am I editing the default style and that's permanent? Like everything that I use after that's going to use that new style? No. Okay. What this is edit a custom style makes a copy of the default that you can then assign directly to a control, and it can pick it up as needed. It's like a local change. The edit default style makes a copy of the hard-coded default style for this project. And it's actually for this style book that we'll see in a second. From there, we can make changes. The difference is that if we're doing it at the default style, it's going to be named a certain way, and every group box is going to pick up that custom version in our project. We'll look at both. It's pretty easy, but just don't get too confused over that. So this, I right-clicked, I said edit the custom style. And if you've done this in XE2, this should look somewhat similar but different. There used to be a tree structure over on the right-hand side here. That's gone. It's been replaced by the structure pane. So everything's been trying to be driven out of this side. I know this is a custom style because the name of the style is called GroupBox1 Style 1. It takes the component name, GroupBox1, adds style to it, and then if it counts it. So if I did it again, I would get a GroupBox1 Style 2. So it's just made a copy. And what's interesting is that I can look at this, and whenever I'm dealing with a style, there's this outer layout. And then layouts are like a panel in the VCL, but no window handle, no containership, no presentation. It's simply to align things in, and lay out what you want. And as we get through more examples, we'll see that a lot of what we do in FireMonkey is compositing, is taking pieces and bringing them together to make a whole, rather than write code to do all of that. We're going to do a lot of it visually. So drilling down, the group box itself, its main style is a layout. It's just saying it's going to control where everything goes. Inside of this, if we look at that, we have a background. And this has changed a bit because of the new features in XE3 adding bitmap image support for control rendering. This used to be just a regular rectangle to change the way something looked. And in this case, now we've got the text is also in here where it's positioned. What I don't like is, for some particular reason, they make these really small, and you can't get a good feel for what it looks like. And I know it's very faint, but what I'm trying to do first off is let's get the top bar below. And actually, now that I'm thinking about this, and the fact that this is a sub-image and it's not going to have any of the properties that I was looking for, so we're going to jump ahead and customize. I can show positioning. I'll do that first, and then we'll go and I'll change it up some more. If I can look at the text element, and then we look at the position value, and we're going to look at all these core features in a minute, but the X position is 15, and that's from the left, and then the Y position is -8. You're like, -8? How do we have a -8? Well, the reason for that, and again, Y does go down, so our origin in FireMonkey is upper left. That's the same, thank goodness for that. Didn't have to be, but it is, at least it is. But if we look at the structure, the text element that's representing the caption is actually parented by the background, by this thing called a T subimage. And the subimage is what's linking into the Windows 7 group box style, because I'm running Windows 7. And that's why it looks this particular way. The relative position of the text element is in relation to its parent. This is why it's negative, so that it's above the control. So if I change this to even more, if I go to minus 16, you can see that I've pulled the caption up even higher above it. But now let's change the background image itself. So its position of 8, let's bring this down to 16, so that the border now is lower. The caption still fits in the outer layout, but I don't know if you can see it, it's really faint, that the border is getting clipped. Even though the text isn't over it, the label or the text field is bigger, so it's clipping it. Well, we can fix that by going into Clip Parent and turning that off. And now we can see that we've got an underline over the whole thing. So I've got all this capability to make changes and things. Well, it even goes beyond just this. I can go in and replace this. I can go and find a T rectangle and drag this over onto my layout, and I'm going to have the text, I'm going to have the text inside of this, but I'm going to have this go to the contents. I'm going to put the text into this. I'm going to delete the subimage, and I can't delete the subimage yet. There's no way to delete it. I'm going to try to stay positive. I know we're like 20 minutes in and I'm already doing something. But I do need to change it. I need to change its style name. And don't worry about it if you don't know what's going on here. That's quite all right. I don't even know what's going on here sometimes. So because I know how this is working, and I'll tell you how to know how this is working in a minute, I'm changing the style name of this rectangle to be background. And by doing that, and let me go and hide that so I don't have to worry about it yet. And so I've got this new rectangle, and the text is in there. And what I want to do is get to the sides and take off everything but the top. And then I'm going to change the fill to none. So I got a nice little underline underneath my group box there. And so I have to name background, call it background for the thing I want to be the background, because the control itself may try to reference this element. It doesn't really matter what that element is. As long as it's there, then everything should work fine. So I've made this change. Let me go in and just make another change that's a little obvious. Let me select my rectangle, change the stroke color to something coral. And let me go ahead and apply and close. And so now I've got my group box that's got a custom look. And yes, it's a little tedious having to go and do that, but once I've done that, I can actually save that setting to a file and keep it around if I want to use that again. Likewise, if I want to drop another group box down, I can see that there's, it still has its original style, coming from the default that was pre-built, defined by Windows 7. If I run this on a Mac, it's going to look a little bit different. If I run this one on a Mac, it's going to look exactly the same, because that's what I set it to be. I'm telling it to be this coral color underline. It's not doing anything different. I'll show you how we can make some changes for that later. But let's say I wanted this one to pick up that same group that was there. I can go to the style lookup property and pick out, oh, that's new. That's a little, they're giving me what this is showing is the group that's already there that it's compatible with. I also know that the name of that one was there it is, groupbox1 style 1. And so if I select that one, then it's going to pick up that same style. But I can resize it. It's not constrained by that. It's just changing its look and feel. If I want to get rid of it, I want to go back to the default, just clear out the style lookup to do that. And it will go back. The default style, if I were to go in and edit that, it's the class name without the T followed by style. So now if I go in and make some sort of change to here, and let me change the default, that's not going to work, but here, I'll change the position of this to be 24. Why would I want to? I don't really know, but just for sake of argument, I'm going to demonstrate what it does. So we're going to throw the caption right in the middle of the box. So I'll go ahead and accept OK on that, and so now I've got this group box with a caption there. I go and drop another group box down, and it automatically picks up that default because that's what I've set at the style book level. So the style book, if you want to go back and make any changes to those, you just double click on it and you get all the styles that were created before. And so now I can go back in and say, no, I don't think I really want the position of that to be 24. Let's just make that -8 again, or 10. And you can adjust.
The style book contains the styles, and the distinction between default style and custom style are just naming.
Correct. The only distinction between a default style and a custom style is how it's named.
Just a little question. First, in the first example of first group box, we have saw that style book was number 2, and then style books was number 1. Now, on the forum.
Yes. Yes.
What does it mean?
It means the IDE is a little flaky sometimes. Yeah, occasionally you might see multiple instances of the style book on your form. I don't know why that's happening. It really shouldn't be.
It's just a style book.
Yeah, it'll say just style book, then it'll say style book 1. I've actually seen him with 4. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to narrow down exactly what causes the copy to come up. I think it has to do when I switch to text and then come back, or if I have the style designer open and I run the app and I haven't applied and closed it, it ends up making a copy when it resyncs the IDE back. So if that happens, it's okay. So what's going on here is, let me go ahead and apply and close that. So the style book that you have, and I can have multiple copies, it really doesn't matter. They're all getting linked into the executable. So as far as the controls that reference them are concerned, you're going to look for a style named a certain way, and as long as it's in your app, it's going to find it. That's the way it's been set up. So the fact you have multiple style books is okay. If you wanted to, you could take the styles, save them to a file, and then load it back in. You could actually merge the two together. It's a little tricky, but it's not too bad. You want to do it in text format, not the native. So
If you have multiple style books on multiple forms with styles that have the same name, which one does take preference?
I don't know. I haven't tried to break that. I've succeeded in breaking many other things, so I haven't gone out looking for that one. It's going to find the style that matches the name in the closest parent that your control is associated with. So it should be a control should be getting the one that's on its own form first, because of the way that it does the lookup. It's all done locally, and
the parent is the application.
I actually don't think it goes beyond the form container. So I don't think you can actually link to a style that's on another style book that's not in your owner chain.
Let's phrase it another way. If you create another form and drop a fresh group box on it, which style does it take?
Let's have some fun.
I'm sorry if I'm diverting.
Oh, this is, understanding these intricacies helps everything further down. So let me add another FireMonkey form to the project. And so if I go and drop a group box on this one, it's a regular group box. It doesn't know anything about that other style book for that reference.
It's trying to find its way up and it doesn't find it.
Correct. It's looking for what it's finding is the one that's associated with the application, which is the default. There's no overrides that are hooked in anywhere else.
So it doesn't make sense to put a style book in, for instance, the data module and use it from the whole application. Get a feel on how to make things globally inside an application style-wise.
In that case, you use you essentially have to create a global style in the style file. If you look into the styles directory in RAD Studio, so go to your public folder, RAD Studio 10, and there will be a styles directory. That's where all the VCL styles files are, as well as the FireMonkey styles. Those files, like for the Metropolis stuff that they've done, those actually customize all the controls that they're aware of. And so when you load that, it's loaded at the application level because it's done through the application settings. So then that replaces the standard. So to globally change it, you do it at that high level, at the application level. For localized things, you do it in a style book on the form you want to customize. All right, so enough of that. So styles give us all kinds of flexibility, changes, and so forth. So let me go back to my stuff. So digging a little deeper, we've seen some of the surface stuff, and you guys have probably seen the demos of what FireMonkey can do, the fancy 3D cubes and grids and all of that stuff. We're getting lower level than all of that. Fortunately, there's a lot of shared ancestry when it comes to the two frameworks. Everything still descends from T-object, T-persistent is still there, same exact class. Even T-component is the exact same class from the VCL. It's only from that point down that it starts to change, and quite a bit. So if you're familiar with the VCL, these are the core main classes that you deal with. As I said before, T-object, persistent, and component are all in there. TControl is your base class in the VCL for visual controls. Excuse me, so from there, you've got your graphic control side, which is really just displaying something, no window handle, no keyboard focus, your label, for example. Windowed controls, your custom controls, things that take the keyboard focus. All of that goes into any custom painting and so forth. Containership is in a Win control side. Still have non-visual controls, streamable, non-streamable, and so forth. So continuing, looking at FireMonkey, similar, persistent, non-streamable class is still there, non-visual components are still there. It's the same T data source that we're dealing with, same client data set, no difference. You still have T-strings and T-string lists. But instead of TControl being right below T-component, it is TFMX object. And it is the base class for every FireMonkey related control, or class, I should say. Hanging off of FMX object, you've got some support classes like the style book. It needs to come from FMX object. It also, there's a specialized FireMonkey timer that comes from there. One of the things to remember throughout this is that FireMonkey is designed to be cross-platform. So the VCL is strictly Windows, Win32, Win64, but it's still Windows, same API. FireMonkey's not the same. There's layers underneath it that do the cross-platform for us. So you'll see certain features that lend itself to that. TControl is still your visual representation entry point, but rather than this concept of graphic controls and windowed controls and so forth, there's two separate concepts in FireMonkey. There are primitives and there are styled controls, and that's where your separation is. The primitives are all have a base class of T-shape. And it's kind of funny, you know, if you learned object-oriented programming way back, one of the classic examples that instructors give is a T-shaped class with a T-rectangle, a T-circle, and so forth. And yeah, we've got it now. It's right in the product. It's everything that we've been learning for years is now there. So now we have on the other side is a styled control, and the group box is a styled control. It means that there's a style associated with it. It means we can customize that style and do certain things with it. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about the difference between these two groups of controls, and we'll look at examples on both sides as we move forward. So, a couple things, a couple more things. One of the powerful features of the VCL is the whole delegate model with events. Going back to the OWL days, you know, if you wanted the button to do anything, you had to create a descendant to do the actual work when it was clicked. Now we have an event that we can say, hey, I'm the button, I'll present myself as a button to the screen. When I get clicked, I'm going to call somebody else to do the actual work. It's just, you know, it's delegation through events. And the event model is the same both in FireMonkey and the VCL. So great, that's one less thing we have to worry about that's different. Persistence is shared between the two. It's the same streaming format, same concept. Basic classes like TCollection and TCollection item exist on both sides. Do the exact same thing. One notable change is there are no component messages in FireMonkey. For those of you that are familiar with this, maybe you haven't seen it in a while, a component message is similar in concept to a window message. The idea behind it is that the TControl class in the VCL defines many of the common properties, like the font or the caption. Well, if you are in a descendant class, in a label, for example, well, your control might want to know that the caption was changed. If you've got an auto size property, for example, the caption changes, I may have to change the size of the control appropriately. Well, the VCL accomplishes all of that through component messages. So your descendant classes would listen for these special component messages in order to respond to them. They don't exist in FireMonkey. Sometimes they're not even necessary because of the way FireMonkey composites its controls. In the cases where it is necessary for a notification to go down, there's a virtual method now that gets called. So instead of some component message called CM_text changed, there's a text changed function that you could override if you needed to know that. So just keep that in mind. The coordinate system, I already talked about that. It's upper left for both. Good. However, VCL is all integer-based. FireMonkey is floating point. So you will see lots of decimal points in your form files if you look at the text. because everything is a floating point number. One thing so side note, and as I think of these, I'll pop them in. When you're dealing with FireMonkey, if you're doing any positioning, like we've done for years in our VCL apps, we want to position the form to be in the midpoint of the screen or middle between two other spots, and we always do div to do the division. Don't do the actual real division. You're going to get better results. It'll scale better. You won't introduce any integer division as you change things because everything's scalable in FireMonkey. So, was that a question in the back or a stretch? Okay. So some other changes. Caption has been changed to text, except for on the form. I don't like it. I still don't like it. I tolerate it, but I don't like it. I like caption indicated to me that it was a read-only field. It wasn't editable. Text was editable. Now it's all text. It's fine. I can deal with it. There's no left and top. So if you're looking for where that control is, it's not there. It's in the position property, which has subproperties of X and Y. And some of you might be going, huh? Okay, why did they have to make that change? Well, the reason for doing that is you can have a control in 3D space with FireMonkey as well. So when you're on a form 3D or you're using a three-dimensional control, the position property gets extended to have a Z value as well. And Z goes positive away from you. So if you give it a negative, it'll come towards you. Positive will go away. And just keep that in mind. All right. Owners, parents, and children. Concept of ownership is the same. There is a components list. It's if a control owns its children, then it's going to free them when it gets destroyed. All that's the same. It's all in there. FireMonkey has the notion of a parent, but it's not quite the same as the VCL. The parenting in the VCL was tied to Windows, Microsoft Windows and window handles and what the parenting relationship meant. Clipping and all of those rules were very strict because of the way Windows worked. It's not quite the same. What's nice about it is that any control can be the parent of another control. You don't have this concept that it has to be the only thing that accepts controls. You can parent an edit into a label if you wanted. Or what do I have here? The edit can be the parent of a label. It's like, okay, well, why would I want to drop a label in an edit? Well, you really wouldn't. But what's nice is that, well, it's not going to be in it. I'm going to show the example. But the parenting relationship's responsible for propagating changes at the parent level down to all of its children. So one of the challenges in the VCL, unless you've made certain accommodations for it in a custom control, if you drop a checkbox onto a panel or a group box and you disable the group box, the checkbox doesn't look any different. It looks just like it's enabled. You can't click on it, but its appearance doesn't change at all. If you want it to change, you have to write a custom control to do that. I know a company that does that. It's beside the point. In FireMonkey, none of that matters anymore because when you disable the parent, all of the children get disabled automatically and reflect that in their appearance. All the other properties that are new and exciting also carry this on. So let's take another quick look let me get rid of that. And where's my edit? I can never find, it's the label. Okay, I'll drop a label there, that's fine. I want the edit. Okay, and so what I want to do is I wanted to parent the label into the edit. So I'm going to parent that. Well, what's nice is by doing that, I can still move the label wherever I want. Maybe I want the label to be up and to the left. Now remember, the positioning is all based on its parent. So the label is going to have a negative position because it's above the control it's tied to. Well, what's nice is I can move the edit and the label comes with. This is great. I mean, how many times have we ever wanted to do this? And you're not limited. I can drop multiple. I can drop another label. And it never goes where I want. They didn't want to do that. I can put this one here, and they all go together. And if I go and disable the parent, all the children get disabled, even at design time. How nice. Go to the rotation angle and change that to 45. And they all change with it. So this is really powerful when we start talking about tweaking out our UI. All right. So moving on. There is a T-canvas in FireMonkey. However, it serves the same purpose as the canvas in the VCL, but it does so in a slightly different way. It's more abstract, and it's not a direct reference to the device context. There is still a device context somewhere deep down in FireMonkey because it's on a window. In Microsoft Windows, there's a device context there. We don't care about that anymore. We don't have to worry about it. There's no more need for selecting objects in and out of the device context. The canvas in the VCL did that for us. It managed to cache them and would bring them back in as needed. The way the canvas is used is to use these primitives that we'll see shortly to call basically two functions: to fill something and to draw something. And the something is defined by the primitive. The canvas simply uses the primitive's functions to fill, example, rectangle, and draw the rectangle. The fill fills the interior. The outside, the draw, uses the stroke. So likewise, text is a primitive, and we now have a fill text, which is kind of interesting because the fill text means we can use all of the fill properties that are available in the brush, which means gradient fills and outlines and all kinds of fancy things we haven't been able to have for a font. And we get to have that with the text primitive. What's interesting is that you will rarely ever use the T-canvas directly. Even in a paint override in a FireMonkey control, you probably won't be referencing the canvas and doing individual drawings. It's usually using a primitive instead. And so we'll see that as we go through some of the examples in the next session. So TControl. I'll go through, most of these I already touched on. I'll highlight the ones that are different, but TControl in FireMonkey gives us all these core features that we're used to. Opacity, alpha blending is built in at the TControl level. Margins and padding are there. They're opposite the VCL. Alignment is there, but extended. There's a lot more ways to align things. We'll see an example of that where we're going to composite elements together, and having something called the align center is really nice to have. And so we'll see what that it gets involved with. We talked about visibility, scaling, rotation, mouse interactions, keyboard, focus changes, animations, and all the triggers that drive animations. That's another key feature of FireMonkey. We may touch on some of the animation stuff in the next session if we get to it. And then, of course, there's painting, base painting support at that level.
So about keyword focus,
Yep.
that's handled at the control level?
Yep. The base, the events are there. The ability to handle the keyboard is surfaced there. Not every control will, but it's there. So, I mean, technically, you could modify a label to handle the keyboard. Don't know if you'd want to, but you could. So T-shape is where the primitives start. And so there's really only two properties for a shape. There's the fill, and it's got a bunch of sub-properties to find how we fill something, and there's a stroke. And likewise, it has a whole bunch of things. We're going to see these when we create our own primitives. We're going to extend the primitives that are part of FireMonkey. What will happen is that these shapes will initialize their canvas, or the canvas that's being used at the time, whether that's on the form or in the control itself that's using it, and copies their settings into the canvas's equivalents. And then the canvas ends up using those when it makes the method calls to do the painting. So rather than do a canvas.draw rectangle or fill rectangle like we would do in the VCL, we're just going to create a rectangle primitive and have the canvas draw it. So it ends up becoming canvas.draw and draw this rectangle, and you give it what it has. So we don't have to be so concerned with all the elements that make up the drawing. We set a bunch of properties and say, go do this, and then it takes care of it. Why that's really important is when we start talking about all the compositing that goes on, multiple layers of elements are all kind of put into an area, and we want an engine to manage that rather than our own code to be able to figure out, oh, well, this particular element's completely covered by a layer that's above it, so we don't have to do any of the painting at all. So the engine in FireMonkey takes all of that, reduces it down to only what's needed to be displayed, and operates the primitives appropriately. It's very cool. So the styled control gives us the ability to hook into styles, defining the appearance. I already talked about the style lookup. That gives us the ability to reference a changed style that's in a style book. And there's typically, whenever you see a style lookup, right above it, or below it, I should say, is a style names property. And you might be wondering, well, what is that for? And it's not used a lot on your form directly, but it can be. We're going to use it when we define the styles for our own custom controls, because it's going to be how we're going to connect our code to the style pieces. You can actually name a style at the control level and say, hey, this is my new style. Another control can reference that style name and it will find it. So it doesn't even need to be in the style book. You can make changes to a piece, name it, and then the style lookup of another control can reference that other piece. It's very interconnected. So when we start talking about the actual controls that we want to build, there's this notion in the VCL that everything is in the code. Occasionally we might have a form that we bring in if we want to display a dialogue or something like that, but everything that we do is all inside of this code. And so we're going to set up all the properties and we're going to write the paint override to do all the display. And we have to be very careful that, okay, we have to cover the entire interior, or we have to set up the opaque setting and make sure that we're only doing part of it, cover everything. We don't want to overlap things because then we get flicker if we have to erase it and clear it up. It's all complicated stuff that we're having to manage. Well, the display and the functionality of the control are very tightly coupled in the VCL. They're inescapably tied together. You have all these properties that are used directly by the painting. Well, when we talk FireMonkey, the representation of what it looks like is in the style. Now I can build the style in code or I can define it as a resource, but it's separate. I can keep it separate. I can replace it with something else like I did with the rectangle. I just pulled out the whole little piece of there and said, use this instead. It still worked like a group box. It still did everything what a group box is supposed to do. So there's this notion of really separating the functional piece of what a control does and what its presentation looks like. And we're going to see that inside of our code, but there's going to be times when we need to be able to take our code piece and communicate with the UI piece. Say, hey, you've got some element that needs to display a value. Well, how do the display piece is in some t-text element or a buttons caption or something. How do I get it in there? Well, that's what these next functions here are all driving for, is we need to be able to find the style resource that's being used. We need to connect to it, load it up from the resource file, and then react to it if it changes on us. So when I made a change and said apply and save, my control, or the group box in this case, said, whoa, the style has changed. Reconnect to the pieces in there that you expect to have. And that should lead you to think, well, if the pieces aren't there, what's going to happen?